Hello everyone, I'm André and this is André. Welcome back to BAP 2024 in Birmingham. Ondrej Zika from the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. Do you want to just say hello and introduce yourself?
I'm currently based at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, where I'm studying sort of how individuals with anxiety try and understand and learn about uncertainty, essentially.
Fabulous. So I spent quite a few days last week looking through all the speaker forms submitted by people coming to this conference. And Andre's talk stood out for me as somebody with social anxiety who struggles a lot with uncertainty. So I decided I'm going to speak to him just for personal reasons, but hopefully it's interesting for everybody else as well. So yeah, tell us a little bit about why people with anxiety don't like uncertainty and do things to try and cope with it.
We don't really know why exactly, but we think that perhaps this is related to the fact that there's different sources of uncertainty in the world. There are some things which are purely random and what we call stochastic. So they just occur and they are completely out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also other things which we think we can learn about. And we think that perhaps individuals high in anxiety sometimes struggle with dissociating what is just a random piece of information and what is a signal, what is something they should be learning about.
Yeah.
This leaves a sort of big space in terms of how much they perceive what they should be learning and creates a lot of subjective ambiguity. And essentially the work we've been doing tries to understand the gaps that anxious individuals fill into this problem. So the causal relationships they assume about uncertain situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can relate to that. I'm interviewing you here on a big stage in a big building, and I'm thinking, am I holding the microphone in the right place? He's looking at me a bit funny because I started talking about this stuff during an interview, and I'm filling in those gaps because I don't like the uncertainty. I want it to go away.
Yeah, so this is one of the problems that we study in the lab. For example, in social anxiety, let's say you meet someone where we're talking to each other. Let's say if I gave you a really weird look right now, how would it make you feel, right? You could assume that perhaps you did something to me to upset me, but in fact, it could just be that I just got a pain in my back from my cycle yesterday, which is true. And essentially, what we're studying in anxiety is trying to understand when people impose these kind of causal relationships, which might not in fact reflect the true nature of things, but might actually help to provide an explanation perhaps to what's happening. And we think that perhaps in anxiety, these explanations might sometimes be biased or overly complex situations at times.
Yeah, and I guess that links in with the kind of paranoia potentially, or a kind of perfectionism potentially, which are also things that might come alongside with an anxious person.
Yeah, absolutely. We think that this sort of might explain, for example, the tendency to find details and rules which might not be reflective of true nature of things, but perhaps they help to reduce subjective sense of sort of lower uncertainty or ambiguity, I should say. And this is a kind of a starting research program that I've been working on a little bit.
So tell us about the research you're doing and how you're trying to study this.
So to date, we have done a few studies where we try to induce rules in environments. So people come to the lab and they do an experiment where they receive electrical shocks, which is already quite anxiety provoking.
Mm-hmm.
But what we haven't told them is that there is a pattern in the way the shocks are delivered. That is, sometimes the probability of shock is very high and sometimes it's rather low. We don't tell them anything about this pattern. And what we see is that anxious individuals seem to be much better at dissociating and identifying this hidden pattern that we have put into the task. So you could argue in some sense that they are actually better at learning in aversive environments, but perhaps this is just a sort of coping mechanism to reduce and capture the environment to reduce their own uncertainty as well. So there is something positive in terms of what anxiety does to us, but we also think that this can become maladaptive in some cases, because this means that you are finding patterns in these kind of noisy observations. And one thing I'm wondering about for future research is also perhaps if individuals with clinical levels of anxiety might be doing this a bit too much. That is, finding contexts and contextual information which is actually irrelevant and treating it as relevant, for example.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So I guess you're interested in the kind of mechanisms of how it's working there. Do you see this kind of leading in any way to treatment that is different from what we currently have?
There is a special sort of module of the CBT which focuses on intolerance of uncertainty. However, at the moment, uncertainty is treated as one thing, essentially. I believe that there are different types of sources of uncertainty, and perhaps understanding this within individual can help us to have a better and targeted CBT sort of sessions. And this is something I would also like to work on in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks for giving us a little window into your work. I hope the talk goes well. And yeah, thanks personally for explaining that to me. Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.